So if I go out in the spirit, forgive me. Black History Month, or National African History Month, has its origins and was the brainchild of African-American historian Carter G. Woodson. Dr. Woodson was a Harvard-trained historian. He joined forces with the Congregational minister, Jesse Moreland, in 1950. And this is important to locate the context. When they established the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, the primary purpose was the researching and promoting the achievements of African Americans and other people of African descent. The reason why that was important was because the information about people of African descent was routinely eliminated or discounted from the historical record. So in 1950, and a half a century after the Emancipation Proclamation in the U.S., the lives of its black citizens were still challenged on all sides. The economic hardships and failure of the promises that were proffered at the end of the Reconstruction period in the southern states stimulated what was then known as the Great Migration of teeming millions of the large agrarian black population of the South to the northern urban centers. I'm going to stop there and pause for a minute because I want you to, because this is a celebration of the history of the African peoples in North America and around the world. And so if you can just reflect what it must have been like for those people at that particular time, having been told that when you're liberated, there are certain things that are going to make you equipped to deal with the challenges of the society. And we don't have enough time to give the history lesson, but during that Reconstruction period, the hopes of people of African descent on the other side of the border were raised to such a level, and many schools were established by freemen. I had the distinct opportunity of working in one of those institutions in the States. I worked at the Historical Black College, Florida Memorial University in South Florida. And it's, when I think about this, I think about those people who created institutions like that just out of slavery. And so the disappointment that they experienced during that time didn't prevent them from looking forward. And it was a transformational period in the historical, given the history of those people, it was a transformational period because out of the disappointments, there were several movements that were created. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was one, and it was led by the scholar, the Harvard scholar, Dr. E.B. Du Bois, and simultaneous to that, there was also the Harlem Renaissance. And if you don't know anything about the Harlem Renaissance, when you get home, just Google it. It'll be an inspiration to you. The cultural moment that allowed for the establishment of wonderful poets like Langston Hughes and my personal hero Jean Toomer came out of that period, and also Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican immigrant who found himself in New York at that time, created a mass movement that engendered pride in the heritage of people of African descent. And so out of the disappointment, the important thing about history is that you don't look back to stay back. You look back to move forward. And these people had used those moments to create the kinds of institutions that are still, the resonance of those institutions are still felt today. The Rastafarian movement and most of the cultural trajectory or impetus of that was experienced in the 60s came out of Marcus Garvey. The legal challenges that are still relevant today came out of the NAACP. And there's so much more that can be said about those two individuals, W. Du Bois, E. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey, and it would take a whole evening to exhaust their influence. But I just want to share that with you because this is the context in which what Clip3w and her organization has done is to put where we are in Victoria in this moment in that tradition, that wonderful tradition of people who have a sense of their value or worth regardless of what the society says about you. So we're going to quickly locate the place, the historical position of blacks and African peoples on this side of the border. Harriet Tubman, the heroine of the Underground Railroad, made 19 secret trips from the southern states and guided over 300 people to freedom to settle in southern Ontario. The most notable of whom was the Methodist preacher and abolitionist Josiah Henson. Black people had already been present in Canada since the 1500s, mostly as slaves, but the first person of African descent recorded to arrive on Canadian soil was the extraordinary multilingual interpreter and navigator, Matthew DaCosta. He was such an essential asset to the early Dutch colonists because he was able to be a translator in their interactions with the First Nation people. Also, black people were brought into Upper Canada in the 1700s, and as they had fought with the British during the American Revolution, and also settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. I have a particular personal stake in this because during that period also, the Maroons were brought to Nova Scotia, and part of my family heritage is from the Maroons. Not those particular Maroons, but having that knowledge about those people and what they did in terms of liberating African slaves engendered pride for me as a black Jamaican who moved to Canada as a teenager, and having that knowledge that they were also an important part of Canadian history is a source of pride. In British Columbia, black people fleeing discrimination in the U.S. also settled here on Vancouver Island in 1858 during the gold rush. And Mayor, it might serve you well to know, and perhaps you already know this, that one of the settlers, Mifflin Gibbs, became a successful merchant and was elected to the City Council of Victoria. Just about done. And so we've just provided a cursory look and the presence of people of African descent as being a part of the Canadian tapestry from its very beginnings. The history and contributions of the African diaspora to the Canadian experience is indisputable. And it's noteworthy and continues as our country itself becomes more diverse, with each community making Canada richer in its economic power and in many more ways. This is the context in which VAX, as I said before, operates. VAX, Victoria African Caribbean Society, under the dynamic leadership of its founder, Paul Cherie and Boussi, continues in the great tradition of organizations dedicated to the preservation, acknowledgement, and of the contributions of people of African descent to the larger community. These acknowledgements are vital if Canada wishes to continue its role in the world as a tolerant, welcoming community in a world that is becoming more and more fractious and intolerant of diversity. Just look to our neighbors to the south, and we understand why that's important. I'm going to do something a little different before I sit down. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote in 1983. I also had, when I was a younger person, I had this upholstery spirit, and we organized, we had a society here in Victoria also called VAX, but it was the Victoria Afro-Canadian Society, and we had the first multicultural festival, which was held in Market Square in 1984. And part of the reason I did this, with the aid of some of my friends, we went to Jamaica in 1980 after Bob Marley had visited British Columbia in 1978, and the impact that he made on the Vancouver community was so profound that we decided, a group of my friends, that we wanted to go to Jamaica to film the powerful transformation that was happening in that society and its impact, and it's still felt